In 2010, Tom and Susan Johnson got married, merging their families. Tom brought his 17-year-old son, Jason, into the new family, while Susan brought her 16-year-old daughter, Emily. Initially, their relationship was kind and peaceful, and they soon became good friends. Over time, deeper feelings began to develop between Jason and Emily, gradually growing into something more than just friendship. They went to school together, shared their joys and sorrows, and soon became inseparable. Their attachment to each other grew stronger every day, turning them into true confidants. Their romance started subtly, with innocent glances and accidental touches. In the evenings, they often spent time together in the living room, pretending to do homework or watch movies. In reality, they enjoyed each other's company, talking for hours about various topics and laughing at their jokes. One evening, when Tom and Susan went to the city on business, Jason and Emily were left alone at home. The atmosphere was tense, and they felt a strange excitement that lingered throughout the evening. That night, after a long conversation, Jason mustered the courage to confess his feelings. Emily was initially shocked, but then admitted that she also felt something more than just brotherly love for him. Their first kiss was timid and awkward, but it marked the beginning of their secret romance. From that moment on, their relationship began to develop rapidly. They met in secluded places where no one could see them. Most often, they went to a nearby forest park, where they walked along the river holding hands or sat on the shore, enjoying the solitude and quiet. Each date brought them joy and a sense of closeness that they couldn't find with anyone else. On weekends, they would go to neighboring towns where they could be themselves without fearing that someone would discover their secret. They visited cinemas, cafes, and amusement parks, pretending to be ordinary teenage lovers. None of their friends or acquaintances suspected that there was something more than friendship between them. Their correspondence was full of romance and passion. They exchanged gifts and photographs that reminded them of the happy moments spent together. However, despite all the romance in their relationship, they understood that their love was forbidden and could not last forever. Jason and Emily lived in constant fear that their secret would be revealed, which would destroy not only their relationship, but also their family. They made plans for the future, dreaming of the day when they could be together openly, but with each passing day, their hope became more elusive. Despite all the difficulties and dangers, they could not give up their feelings. Their love was too strong to be suppressed or forgotten. The secret romance continued for several years, becoming more complex and dangerous. They became masters in the art of hiding their feelings, skillfully pretending to be ordinary brother and sister in the presence of their parents and friends. 2 years had passed since Jason and Emily's secret romance began, and their relationship had become more tense. While they were still deeply attached to each other, both had developed new interests and passions. This became especially apparent when Emily met a new classmate named Jake. Emily met Jake in chemistry class. He was new to the school and immediately caught her attention with his charisma and friendliness. Jake was a fun and outgoing guy who easily connected with classmates. He started helping Emily with her homework, and soon they were spending a lot of time together after school. Their friendship developed quickly, and Emily gradually began to feel something more for Jake. Initially, Emily tried to ignore her newfound feelings. She knew it could jeopardize her relationship with Jason, which was already strained. They were arguing more frequently, and each new argument became more bitter. Jason felt like he was losing Emily, and his jealousy began spiraling out of control. One evening, after another argument with Jason, Emily went on a date with Jake. They walked through the park, talking about everything under the sun. Jake was attentive and caring, and Emily felt calm and protected in his presence. In that moment, she realized she was in love with Jake and that her relationship with Jason had been a mistake. Returning home, Emily decided to talk to Jason. She knew it would be a difficult conversation, but understood that she could no longer live a lie. Emily met Jason in his room and, gathering her courage, confessed her feelings for Jake. Jason was stunned and furious. He couldn't believe Emily could betray him. His jealousy and anger reached a boiling point. Over the next few weeks, he couldn't settle down. Jason began watching Emily, monitoring her every move, trying to understand what had happened between her and Jake. Meanwhile, Emily felt increasingly liberated. She enjoyed her time with Jake and cherished every moment they spent together. Their relationship progressed quickly, and Emily was sure she had made the right choice. One evening, as Emily returned home from a date with Jake, she found Jason waiting for her in her room. He was in a state of extreme agitation and demanded explanations. Emily tried to calm him down, explaining that their relationship had been a mistake and that she wanted to start a new life. Jason couldn't accept Emily's decision. He was consumed by jealousy and despair. He felt like he was losing control over his life, realizing that they couldn't continue living together in the same family and under the same roof. He decided that Emily needed to pay for her betrayal, but Jason was cunning and knew that a direct attack would land him behind bars. He began devising a plan that could permanently remove Emily from his life while leaving no evidence against himself. Jason decided to stage Emily's murder to make it look like Jake was responsible. He carefully monitored Emily and Jake's schedules, finding out when they spent the most time together. Jason also studied Jake's behavior, habits, and weaknesses to make the setup as realistic as possible. One evening, Emily went on a date with Jake. That day, their parents were supposed to return late from work, and Jason decided it was time to act. He prepared meticulously, gathering items that could indicate Jake's presence at the crime scene and taking a knife, the murder weapon, with him. Jason chose the moment when Emily was supposed to return home after her date. Entering the house through the back door to avoid drawing attention, Jason wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints and began setting up the crime scene. He scattered Jake's belongings, which he had secretly taken from his car a few days earlier, around Emily's room. When Emily returned home, she noticed something was amiss in her room. She paused in the doorway, peering into the dim light, and that's when Jason attacked. He struck her with the knife, inflicting several fatal wounds. Emily collapsed to the floor, unable to comprehend what had happened. Jason acted swiftly and cold-bloodedly. He left the knife next to Emily's body, already bearing Jake's fingerprints. Then, he ensured there were enough traces left at the crime scene indicating Jake's presence. Finished with his plan, Jason carefully exited the house through the back door and wandered around the town to ensure surveillance cameras captured his absence during the crime. The next morning, Susan discovered her daughter's body and called the police. The investigation began immediately. Examining the crime scene, the police found numerous clues pointing to Jake, his belongings, fingerprints on the knife, and signs of struggle that could indicate a fight. Jason achieved his goal. He removed Jake and the traitor from his life and left no traces that could point to his guilt. Initially, all evidence pointed to Jake. He denied his guilt, but the situation was not in his favor. The prosecutor presented compelling evidence, and Jake was charged with Emily's murder. However, some investigators, including Detective Sarah Blake, began noticing discrepancies in the case. Sarah was an experienced detective who intuitively sensed when something was amiss. She carefully studied the crime scene and noticed some peculiarities. Jake's belongings were scattered too neatly, as if someone intentionally created disorder. The fingerprints on the knife also seemed suspicious. They were too clear. Any criminal would have tried to wipe away the prints, but for some reason, the killer did not. Sarah decided to delve deeper into the case and talk to those around, especially the Johnson family. Jason appeared particularly interesting to her. He was very calm and composed, which seemed strange to her for someone who had lost a sister. Sarah continued to examine the evidence and noticed peculiarities in Jason's statements. He described the events of that night in too much detail, as if he had rehearsed them beforehand. She also found evidence that Jason had purchased gloves and a knife several weeks before the murder. Simultaneously, Sarah reviewed the surveillance cameras, which confirmed her suspicions. Jake had an alibi for the time of the murder. He was at home with his parents. Sarah decided to conduct covert surveillance on Jason. She noticed that he often drove to the forest park where he and Emily used to walk together. Sarah observed his behavior and soon discovered that he consistently returned to one particular spot, a secluded corner of the park. One night, following Jason, Sarah noticed him stopping at this spot and digging into the ground. After he left, she returned to the location and found hidden personal items belonging to Emily and Jake, which Jason had used to fabricate evidence. Having gathered sufficient evidence, Sarah and her team arrested Jason. He was shocked, but tried to maintain composure. During questioning, he initially denied his guilt, but under the pressure of new evidence and skilled questioning by a psychologist, he began to crack. Eventually, Jason confessed to the crime. He described how he had planned the murder and set up the framing to make it look like Jake was responsible. His obsession with Emily and jealousy over her new relationship led him to commit this terrible act. Jason was found guilty of Emily's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His confession came as a shock to everyone who knew him and Emily. The Johnson family was left shattered, but at least they were given the chance to come to terms with their grief, knowing the truth.